thank you, and again, thank the organizers at the African Center for Strategic Studies for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. I was asked to look at the next 6 months, 3 years. I think we all were. Look at some goals, some constraints, and look at what might be some benchmarks of success. I think the first question is really about who sets the goals. And clearly this is a South Sudanese discussion, but more importantly, that the process of achieving these goals, these transitional goals, is essentially the factor that will make them successful. So if the South Sudanese achieving these goals is critical. That said, I'm going to make basically 3 points, 3 main points. The first is that I think there can be, for those who want to find a lasting solution to the conflict, I think we can find common goals that are shared. I think the debate largely focuses on the models and the mechanisms needed to achieve those goals. And I would say it varies depending on how you see the cause or the root cause of the current crisis. The second point is that regardless of the models and the mechanisms, there will still be challenges for whoever leads or for the South Sudanese, regardless of those models and mechanisms, that they will be hard to avoid. Challenges like stability, challenges like justice that get in the way of these longer-term transformative goals. And then the last thing is I'm really going to argue to focus less on the events and more on the conditions for which those events, the Constitution, the elections, can be genuinely transformative. So those are the 3 main points I'm going to cover. So looking ahead over the next 3 years, even in 2 years, by the end of 2015, the National Constitutional Review Commission should have submitted a draft constitution based on consultations. At the same time, in the same year, earlier, maybe even April, there should be elections. Before those elections, there needed to be a census, at least that's on the table. There needs to be an SPLM convention, and the other political parties need to also organize that. There needs to be national reconciliation, which is really a precondition for those elections to happen in a stable way. And then you have these other laws in varying degrees of either development or implementation that are ultimately important. Local Government Act, Media Act, Land Act, the NGO, the political party laws. All of these things are there in the next 2 years. The calendar is very crowded and full of democracy. I'm being sarcastic. So if we want to look forward and look at some practical goals, a couple things there, I think we need to look at the transition period, not the 20-year plan, not the 2050 or whatever these plans are, but something very specific. How do you ensure that there is a successful transition? I think in the broad goals, a group of diaspora put a paper out and talked about the broad goal being good governance. And I think everybody's touched on it. Everything from broad-based, inclusive, democratic, decentralized, where patronage gives way to meritocracy, where supremacy of rule of law is there. I think there isn't going to be a disagreement on these broad goals for South Sudan. But what comes as the challenge is how you see, I think, breaking people up into 2 schools in terms of how you see the cause of the conflict. And I'm going to oversimplify this. I'd say one school looks at this conflict very much as personal rivalries between individuals based on challenges for power, advisors, political competition, a few people who took the country off course, and that the violence was really about an immediate threat and the revenge about immediate events and responding to those immediate events. That is really the problem that needs to be addressed. It's much more acute. Where the others, as Jacques pointed out, and I think a lot of people will say, actually this was the trigger. The roots of this cause date back to historic rivalries between Dinka and Nuer from the time when they were both brothers under the same family, or from 50 years of liberation struggle, or 30 years of SPLM struggle, or 91, or 6 years of CPA institution building, or 3 years of nation state building post-independence. So how you see the root causes looks at how you will look at the models and mechanisms. So let me start by going through the goals. I'm going to focus first on leadership of the transition. And that the first goal for leading the transition really has to be the transition, not being president, not leading beyond the transition, not setting up your party or institution beyond that, but a genuine focus on what it takes to create, promote, and protect this transition to the goal that's been set. if you see this as much more about personal rivalries than the formula, it's a power-sharing formula where you balance ethnicity, regionality, you balance maybe gender, but you find the right formula where the more extreme elements are either weakened or isolated, the more moderate elements are centralized, and that you get back on course through that configuration of leadership. And that the SPLM and the SPLA, if reformed, are the engines and drivers for this process, and that they got off track. The other school of thinking is that actually you can't build an institution, even regardless of the powers of the president. Whoever is president in South Sudan is still the head of the government, head of the army, head of a political party with no other political party competing, and the single largest employer in a country with no private sector. That power, no institution can be built strong enough to resist an office with that kind of power. They would argue, this camp argues generally, if you put the same people in the same government, ask them to discuss the same issues, why would you get a different result? And in that, you have a range of solutions that have been offered. One, which is an interesting one, is a kind of council of elders, council of the wise, a board of directors that sits over the executive and shepherds that. Another one was a UN protectorate was put forward, and I know that was dismissed by the government of South Sudan. In some ways, I think if you look at the situation South Sudan's in, it's economically dependent on Sudan. It's economically dependent on the international donor community for billions of dollars of humanitarian aid community. It's militarily dependent on Uganda, on 4 peacekeeping missions in the same country. Isn't it already a protectorate? And is this not needs to be formalized and looked at? It's a very dangerous neighborhood for South Sudan to be kind of weak and wounded looking for help. It needs to get its act together. It needs to be cohesive. Doesn't want to be Central African Republic or Eastern Congo. This is not a great place to be looking for help. And so in many ways, it's probably worth those international actors to recognize their influence, their place in this, and understand and position it accordingly. So the second goal would be the model of state and nation building. Again, if you think this was much more of an acute issue that can be addressed, that the model was fine, the Constitution was there, the elections were on the books, the conventions were there. The thing that it just needed to be invested in. It needed to be a priority. These were good ideas. These were things that could have worked with the right configuration, and that a lot of thought has gone into it and a lot of work, and therefore it really is about getting back on track with all this years of investment into building a new state. The flip side is to say, no, the whole model is wrong. It needs rethinking. The current system in South Sudan is 2 part Sudan, 1 part Uganda, 1 part SPLA, SPLM, and all written in English, American English. So, you're just trying to comb through that and say, what is the actual system in Sudan on paper, in reality, and trying to get through that. And then it says, needs to rethink the idea. Is it ethnic federalism that Ethiopia has? Is this separate but equal versus integration, integration over separate but how do you deal with that, especially when there's fear? And then the confederation is one idea, going back to the 3 regions and maybe looking at confederal arrangements as a way to deal with new models for state building. I think, briefly, the issue of security, the issue of justice in particular, the goals of these 2 mechanisms has to be, I think as Kate and the others have pointed out, it really has to be about demilitarizing the political system, about demilitarizing political competition so that there is debate, active debate. And that in addition to, dealing with the conflict and moving beyond the conflict, that the security sector, in particular the army, needs to be constructed in a way that it is useless as a fighting force for a personal, ethnic, political party agenda, so integrated, so professional, that if you bring it in, it falls apart when you try to bring it in to engage. That's the kind of army that South Sudan would need. On the issue of justice and accountability, it has to satisfy the South Sudanese. That's the mark. That's the measure, whether it will or won't. And until justice can replace revenge, and that you will not be able to demilitarize the society as well. And so we need to think of justice very much functionally in this interim period as not just security and justice, not just as moving beyond, taking account of what happened, not just punitive, but restorative, and helping this transition, and focusing not on the long game, but the short one, which is getting through that transition. And the last goal that I'm going to bring forward is the issue of the budget. I think people would say that, you know, the laws are there, it's being developed, that the natural resources are, there's plenty of natural resources that can be developed and pay for this moving forward. And others are saying, no, we should look at a trusteeship. That, you know, the land might belong to the people, but until the government belongs to the people, it needs to sit in a trusteeship. And the government belongs to the people when the transition is over, when there's a permanent constitution. That's when you can start to look at how to use these natural resources. So, talking about, move on quickly to the constraints, or the challenges. I think the first challenge, as we all know, is that the table is largely going to be set before you move to the transition. It's set because the war is continuing. It's set because people are being polarized continually over political and ethnic lines. It's set also and influenced by the mediation efforts and the aid efforts to bring assistance. And I think fundamentally we're asking the wrong question. We're asking, which side are you on? We should be asking, who are you scared of? You know, what are you afraid of? Where do you have confidence in being? Not where do you sit and who represents you. It's a different conversation. It's a bigger conversation. And I think it will help get closer to the closer to what the solution is. Next, I just want to focus on the economy a little bit more. I think it was raised, 75% last year of the budget went to salaries. So, and 78% of that 75% went to military salaries. So besides taking, you know, someone said it's maybe 5% of the entire population is on a direct income from the government. Besides removing them from the workforce, young people from the workforce, putting them in reproductive or security roles, it does not build a country. But what it does do is it prevents you from pulling that money out and putting it into development, because you have this dilemma. If you take the money away from the several hundred thousand people in uniform, young people with arms and one skill, and you leave them on the street, you will never get to development. So there's the dilemma. It costs something. They can't afford peace, South Sudan, at this point. The second is that there are two economies, and they do not link up. There's the economy of the state and the economy of the people, the subsistence economy that most people depend on, and the state economy, which is based on selling off on the natural resources. Oil, 98%, minerals will come in. But if the government chooses to sell not the fish but the river, it will undermine the building of an economy. It will block the communities from coming in and emerging as a private sector. So how you develop this, how you find the money, will either support or undermine your future. The other constraint is simply fear. Simply fear. This idea that you're going to bring the towns to the people. Right now, people are terrified of the towns. So that whole model of development has to be rethought. And my last point in terms of constraints is this issue of comprehensiveness or selectiveness. If you can't do a comprehensive reconciliation, a comprehensive justice program, a comprehensive aid program and development program, you're better off not doing it. It's about whoever's left out will be left out of the nation and the state. They will have the grievances for self-determination that will drive them. So selective implementation of any of these processes, those who are out will be out at this point. So unless you're doing the whole thing, unless it's capable of being inclusive comprehensively, the exclusion is divisive. And so just to kind of wrap up onto the benchmarks for success, I think most likely in the way the mediation efforts tend to be, there's probably going to be a combination where, you know, those who look at the kind of more acute model that I was talking about will be handed, and then everybody will look for transformative opportunities within the agreement that's laid out. But that what was the transitional constitution will become the interim arrangements if they follow the CPA model. But ultimately what you're going to get is a matrix with a timeline and a set of activities laid out for everybody to look at. And what I'm going to argue is the issue is not really to invest in those activities, but invest in the conditions and environment for those activities to be transformational. So how do you move what is an elite, closed-door, slightly exclusive system to one that is genuinely inclusive? Breadth, depth, quality. How do you change anger and fear into something more like healing and trust, confidence building, and essentially confidence building in the government? How do you build responsiveness, not of the international community, but between the government and its people? How do you build the contract, whether through how do you build that contract? Through the Constitution, through taxing the people? Right now, I made this point before, but because there's a disconnect, the success of the government budget rises and falls has nothing to do with the success of the people. It's a very different economy. So there isn't that relationship, that fundamental contract, that if the people aren't doing well, that the government was not doing well with them. That de-link is a significant, that's the contract is broken. You listen to who gives you the check, and the check is not coming from the people. So, how do you replace things like rumors, confusion, and misinformation with informed and a demanding public? How do you replace revenge with justice? And how do you replace political conflict, violent conflict, with debate? I think for the international community, and I would agree with the list of priorities that were laid out by everybody, yes, we have to look at healing. We look at protection of people, protection of natural resources, national healing, support public engagement. This third voice, and I'm not pretending the third voice is some moderate, constructive voice. It is just as diverse as the political parties there. But the idea of looking at constructive, third, public voices into the process, whatever they are, hopefully constructive, and helping them become ultimately a third force is a key area that the international community should look at, and I think the Special Envoy raised this early on. And the Constitution is a clear process. And looking at it from South Africa or Kenya and other places, it is a nation-building process. It is a process in which, if everybody gets to participate, then they will own that contract. And I think the key threshold moments or benchmark moments in a constitutional process is when the population demands to be heard, largely achieved through civic education, and when the population who has been heard demands that their voice is represented in the structures, institutions, and ultimately the Constitution that's there. So those are the two threshold moments for the Constitution, that it is a demand of the people. I just want to say to the international community, this is our exit strategy. This transitional arrangement is our exit strategy. This is where South Sudan is not stuck on the dependency that it's got itself into, especially through this conflict. So thank you very much.